Yeah.
So at any rate, I don't think that there's a good answer. But in my experience, I think you got to have more than one tree. And in which case, then you share a little bit and you have enough left over for yourself.
Yeah.
That's great, Brad. Yeah, and we'll get back to fruit trees in greater detail. Brad's going to pull some thoughts together here, second half of the presentation. So be ready with your questions there. Brad really knows, he's a fruity guy. He knows his fruits, so just challenge him.
Yeah, I suppose the other challenge there is that if with fruit trees you want them pretty low so that they're easy to pick, and that makes it easier for the critters to get access to them, right? Yeah.
Yeah, two other quick topics on summer tree care, just right up front for shade trees and ornamentals is weed management, and this is going to tie into our herbicide discussion. This is the time of year we're often trying to control weeds around our trees. Let's be extra careful when we're applying herbicides. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And then one other thing, Graham and Brad or anybody else, should we be pruning our trees this time of year? I know you're going to touch on that in fruit trees, especially Brad, but what about our shade trees? Should we be pruning right now?
Yeah, there's always kind of the idealistic academic answer and the practical one as well. Generally speaking, late winter, early spring before sap flow starts is an ideal time to be pruning trees. If you're addressing storm damage, of course, you don't have control over that, and you're going to have to do that work after the storm damage occurs. But in terms of seasonality, your elms and your oaks are trees that you really want to try to avoid pruning during the hot months. I would say anywhere between like late April to I don't know, well through September at least. It stays pretty warm into September these days. So pruning elms and oaks at that time of year, you're going to get sap oozing from those pruning cuts that is attractive to insects that can vector disease. So we want to try to avoid that. And that also brings up one other exception, Justin. Typically, we don't recommend the wound dressings, but it is believed that those can be marginally effective if you have to prune
Yep,
an elm or an oak
right.
during the summer months, that a wound dressing might actually be somewhat effective in that particular situation.
Yep.
Otherwise, don't bother with the sprays and all that stuff. You can use
Yeah,
a
you nailed it. You nailed it there, Graham. I appreciate that. Yeah, so we're generally worried about Dutch elm disease spreading throughout American elms and then oak wilt, right, through our oak trees. So,
yeah.
uh, yeah, very good. Any other quick thoughts? If not, I'm
Yeah,
gonna, oh, go ahead.
in the chat, Phil is saying don't over prune, minimize live wood pruning, and I would agree with that. When we prune trees, we're not only taking away leaves that they use to create energy, we're also taking away stored energy in that branch that the tree made in the past. And so we don't want to prune more than we need to achieve our goals. Thank you, Phil.
That Phil guy acts like he knows what he's talking about. We know the difference. No, I'm just teasing Phil. Chime in anybody as we go along here, especially put questions in the chat and we'll monitor them as we go. We
Yeah,
generally do this for an hour, but we could stay all day if you guys are chatty. So
you betcha. Oh, and
I'm
I did
gonna,
forget to mention that I will have CEUs.
oh
So
yeah,
towards the end of the hour, I'll put that in the chat so that you can fill out a form to get your continuing education units.
yeah, thank you so much, Graham. Okay, I'm gonna share a screen here and we're gonna run through what we're seeing with herbicide damage in eastern Nebraska. Is this screen visible?
Yes.
Okay. This is what I think this is one of the most critical topics for our tree health across the state right now. I got to be careful a little bit in that I want to make sure people know that this is a huge issue for me in Waverly personally where I live. It's one of the worst places where we see this damage, but we're all getting out and about running around the state, and the eastern half of Nebraska has this kind of damage all over the place. I've asked Bruce Hoffman to sit in today because he's sure seen it down in the McCook area, and he'll chime in here with a couple thoughts as we go. And then anybody else who has comments around this will carve out some time. I want to fly through these slides. I always put way too many together, but I wanted to show you a lot of pictures of what we're seeing just to help it sink in. So it is a problem throughout the Midwest, and especially in eastern Nebraska in corn and soybean country. The Corn Belt is most hard hit, and that all relates to herbicide management on farm ground primarily. But there's more than one pathway of harm here, so we need to just realize that the herbicide is coming at us from different vectors. There's spray drift where the herbicide could actually be, the spray particles could actually moved onto non-target plants. Then there's vapor drift, which is usually just the volatilization of chemicals late in the day, getting up into the atmosphere and moving. And then there's root uptake, which can happen when you're applying soil-based herbicides around trees to control weeds. So we're going to talk a little bit about all these things. I like to call it herbicide trespass. It gives it a little more sachet. It's not right that people are trespassing on the rest of our properties with their chemicals. It's hard to control, but this really is a frustration in that their chemicals are trespassing on our trees. And it's primarily, for what we're talking about today, this trespass is from vapor drift, from herbicide volatilization, either through lawn care applications or farming. When we think about our communities, there's a lot of people that really get after lawn care to keep their lawns weed free and lush. And that in itself isn't necessarily bad, but the price that comes with that is pretty significant. And here, just think about this statistic. In the United States, 30,000 tons of pesticides are applied to our lawns every year, which is a 10 times higher rate per acre than we use on our agricultural fields. And then there's no-till farming practices. We used to till our farm ground to get rid of weeds primarily. That all shifted over to herbicide spraying after we got into no-till practices, which helps save our soil. That's a very good thing. But we used to be able to apply Roundup herbicide to get rid of most of these weeds, and so many weeds have developed resistance, we've moved on to harsher chemicals, especially growth regulator chemicals, and these chemicals are moving in the atmosphere and causing, excuse me, off-site problems. This herbicide volatilization can happen long after the actual application of the herbicide. I mean, late in the day, the next day, up to even 2 weeks later, they're finding out. And it can move long distances. In the spring, when we have a hot and a dry spring, that means we're really moving that herbicide off target, especially when there's strong winds. Here's a vapor drift animation given to us by our friends at the Prairie Rivers Nature Network, or Prairie Rivers Network in Illinois. They are really dealing with this problem dramatically in Illinois, the heart of corn country. I've talked to people in Illinois and Iowa this last 2 weeks, and it is really bad as it here is in eastern Nebraska. It's even worse there. And the Prairie River Network works really hard to educate and document what's going on in Illinois. It's really horrible for and I'll show you a video at the end about what's going on there that'll really cause you some heartache. So yeah, it's also not just drift and volatilization, but we can kill and harm our trees just through what we throw on the ground. Thank you, Bruce, for sharing this slide the other day of a project he was looking at. He can talk more about it, but when we put down herbicides on, especially around our gravel driveways or along fence lines, our tree roots can reach into that and they can be harmed. Here's an example on the University East Campus right outside this building. They applied herbicides to control weeds in these tree beds 2 years ago. And we noticed tree decline last year, and it's even worse this year on these ginkgos. So that was applied 2 years ago, and it's still causing impact. What are the types of herbicides being detected? The Nebraska Forest Service has done tests. They've done it in Illinois, and these are the chemicals we most often see. The growth regulators, 2,4-D, dicamba, picloram, and triclopyr, and then there's some others. Atrazine is a pre-emergent applied to agricultural crops, which shows up quite often. And then there's glufosinate now, which is applied. It's a contact herbicide similar to Roundup, actually, glyphosate, but it's used in these Liberty Link crops genetically modified crops, corn and soybeans. So that's getting picked up more and more all the time. It's not quite as harmful as the growth regulators, but it is causing harm. When we think about lawn care chemicals, we're primarily talking about Weed B Gon and Trimec type products that have both 2,4-D and dicamba in them. And here on the right is a picture from a Home Depot just taken recently with all this Roundup for sale. We used to think of Roundup as glyphosate, which is actually not very harmful to trees when carefully applied. But if you look at the label on these Roundup Weed and Grass Killer 4, the active ingredients are triclopyr and diquat, both active ingredients for brush and tree killer herbicides. So why are they selling these things and encouraging people to apply them to their lawns? This injury is increasing to non-target trees and landscapes across Nebraska, including farmsteads. You really get to see it a lot in farmsteads, nursery businesses and specialty crops. Oak Prairie Nursery west of Lincoln got hit a few years ago. And I don't know how grape growers do it, because grape is one of the canaries in the coal mine, is showing some of this herbicide damage. And there's also injury to natural areas. Brad was out and saw this even down in Indian Cave State Park on native oaks, hickories, and things like sycamore that shouldn't be showing it in our native woodlands. And then what I focus on, and what the Forest Service focuses on a lot, is injury to community trees and landscapes. This was an application in Fremont a few years ago. Here's some images somebody just recently sent me from a site in Aurora. And if you look at these pictures, a white oak and a sugar maple, both harmed by herbicide drift, the landowner was insistent that they didn't apply any chemicals. So it definitely could have drifted in from farms. But if you look at the lawn there, I'm sorry, but when your lawn is this weed free, you've sprayed something somewhere along the line. Maybe not this spring, but there's a chance this person actually caused harm to their own trees. And that's part of what the Nebraska Forest Service Forest Health Team tries to suss out, is where's the source of this damage coming from. But let's be honest about our own efforts in our own yards. Let's quickly look at what our trees are supposed to look like and the damage that these herbicides are causing. We've forgotten what normal leaves look like here in eastern Nebraska, at least where I live. Tulip tree, bur oak, and a redbud. We just do not see these leaves looking like this anymore. Here's white oak harmed in the middle and what it's supposed to look like on the right. Bur oak on the left with herbicide damage and what it should look like on the right. Red oak. Redbuds are canaries in the coal mines along with some other legumes, but redbuds, I just will not plant another redbud in the work I do in Lincoln or Waverly. I don't think they're going to get through this in the coming years. We're seeing them die in Waverly where I live. So there's a tree on the left, what it looks like across eastern Nebraska now. The tree in the center is a picture I took in Kentucky on my way to Tennessee. And on the tree on the right is from my own yard, where I cut down a redbud, and the leaves early in the season were herbicide damaged. Those that came up in June after I cut the tree down were lush, plump, and what a redbud is supposed to look like. Coffee tree also just looks horrible across eastern Nebraska. You could literally throw a frisbee through these trees. The canopy is so thin, we just do not see coffee trees looking like they're supposed to anymore. Other tree leaves, yellowwood on the left, ginkgo on the right. Ginkgo is hit some years and not others. It's all about the timing of the spray and the leaf bud emergent on these species. Green ash on the left, tulip tree on the right. These are all pictures I've taken from Nebraska trees. Evergreens are also susceptible. This includes concolor fir on the left and southwestern white pine in the middle, and then a picture from Minnesota on the lower right. If we look at these leaves like this time of year, we can actually read a little bit when the herbicide was applied. This tree on the left is from the university campus. You can tell the redbud early in the season, as this branch was starting to elongate, got drifted on, and they did not spray around this tree on campus. So it came in through the atmosphere, but late in the season now, just last week, it has new leaves that look normal. On the right is a bur oak, a picture I took in Waverly last week. Those early season leaves in the upper part of the picture are horribly disturbed, but now new leaves coming out because of our abundant moisture year are looking fine. I'll quickly run through you what I'm dealing with in Waverly. I first started noticing this damage really horribly bad in 2008, and we just didn't know what was going on. It took a few years to figure out, yeah, this was primarily drifting in from agriculture. Here's Waverly and the things that I monitor closely. So just an aerial view, the prevailing winds that we will see the drift from west, southwest, and south, and Waverly abuts the interstate, but also to the west and south are agricultural fields in great abundance. And I see most of the damage in the school properties in the park that I help maintain. I'll go back that previous slide. It would be possible to point out something we're trying to sleuth in Waverly. We do have lawn care happening, and they were really getting after it at the schools to control weeds. And then these businesses, there's an important business in Waverly right adjacent to the park, and they really keep a weed-free lawn. And so we've had to be careful not to assume it's all from farming when it could be from these other applications. And it's probably a mix of those two things. So it's really quite demoralizing to watch the trees that I've personally had a hand in planting or caring for, hundreds of trees across the community. They just literally look like SHIT now every summer, and it almost makes me want to move from the town I've called home for 35 years. This is this year, ginkgo on the left and a hybrid oak on the right. That was in May at leaf emergence, and then back in June, we hit another Brad and I got back from an event in western Nebraska, and we both noticed a second waft of herbicide damage coming through bur oak, post oak, coffee tree. I looked at the cemetery in Waverly. They had horribly damaged bitternut hickories and red oaks and other trees. They actually confessed to me, yep, they sprayed this spring. And now we've got them convinced to move that to the fall or to not do it at all. What I always tell them is the dead people just really don't care what the trees or the lawn looks like. So save the trees, you know. This is at the schools. They really look horrible, about the worst place in town to find trees. They're actually, some of them are now dying in the schools. We have tree decline across town, literally death happening. These are red buds on the left. These were a glorious row of beautiful, wonderful red buds 10 years ago. Now they're probably 70 to 80% dead. And that tree on the right is a white oak. The biggest, oldest white oak in town succumbed to whatever brought it down the last few years, but it had horrible herbicide damage up until recently. I get out and I roam around the countryside and I look at what's happening at farms. And this picture on the, these pictures show what happened to an area just adjacent to this farm field where I caught a guy spraying in 15 to 20 mile per hour winds. I think this was actually fungicide, not herbicide at the time, but this is a good indicator of what's going on in the spring and early summer. Not too far away, this was a batch of native, one of the few small stands of bur oak in northeast Lancaster County on a farmstead. I know the person who lives there, and she's been demoralized the last 10 years watching these bur oaks die. And then we're seeing a pretty unnerving die-off of bur oaks across eastern Nebraska in our native woodlands. If you go to some of our state parks like Schramm Park, Mahoney State Park, and Ponca State Park, trees are dying in unusual abundance. We're not exactly sure what's causing the harm. It's probably a mix of things, but I'll bet my right arm that herbicide drift is part of the issue here on our native trees as well. We're not going to spend any time on this, but there's this concept of mode of sight action for herbicides, and that farming, if you get stuck in one mode of action for how the herbicide kills a plant, then you develop more herbicide resistant weeds, and then you have to use ever greater variety of chemicals to kill them. And that becomes this herbicide treadmill that we're on. We move out of one chemical into the next one, and we did that with dicamba a few years ago, and we're suffering the consequences of that. So as I wrap up here, let me just point out we can take action. We want people to take action and be aware. So the first thing we encourage people to do is document the event. If you know something happened, write the date down, especially if you smelled it or saw it. Write the date, the weather conditions, wind speed, etc., and take some pictures. You can send some of that information directly to me. The Nebraska Forest Service is going to start documenting where this is happening in the landscape across the state as best we can. We can't help you with any lawsuits or even testing your tree debris, but we want to document where it's happening and at least get you to the right people who can help. You can contact the Nebraska Forest Service or your local UNL Extension office for more information. And for those of you dealing with farm-related impacts, report that damage ASAP to the Nebraska Department of Agriculture at the number listed here. And I would be glad to share this PowerPoint with anybody when we're done, so you have these links. And then spread the word. I'd appreciate knowing if people think this works, but I think we have to talk to our neighbors when this happens, unintended harm. I know those are difficult conversations, but if we don't make them aware, how are we ever going to make this better? And there's probably an art to having a good conversation that doesn't lead to anger, but we got to try, in my opinion. And then here's just some landscape management advice. Quickly, I'll run through this. Be extra careful with herbicide use. Duh. Read and follow all label directions. It is the law. But as Brad and I like to tell each other, who's following those label directions? Very few of us. And I would say this for landscapes, just period. Your lawn and your park, don't spray in the spring. We don't need to spray weeds in the spring. If we're going to do that, let's move it to the fall. That's a good first place to start. I would say do more weed pulling or mechanical removal, and then learn to live with some benign weeds, especially in our public parks. You can learn more about all of these topics. There's some great web resources. The Prairie Rivers Network in Illinois is a place I would just start. They have links to incredible videos and documentation of what's going on in Illinois. The Nebraska Department of Agriculture and the Pesticide Safety Group put together a sensitive sites video a few years ago. Bruce Hoffman and I are in that video, so it's still timely for us. There's herbicide drift impacts on plants and wildlife, a video webinar we did a year ago with people across the country. And then there was a great article that Brad shared with me recently from the Yale Environment publication on how herbicide drift from farms is harming trees in the Midwest. I'll wrap up with these final thoughts. Herbicides can be good tools when used carefully. We're not here to say we got to ban herbicides, but we need to be more careful about it. We're not here to vilify farming or the lawn care industry, but they are the source of these problems. We can do much better, and we should do much better. It's not okay to have chemical trespass just because we live in Nebraska. It's not okay. We need to push back against it. Our trees are clearly showing a big problem with the air we all breathe each spring. It's almost certainly causing premature tree death and decline to native trees and planted trees. And then what about the public health concerns about the air we are breathing? This is not well understood. A lot of these herbicides, I'll be the first to tell you that the EPA does not list as carcinogenic, but that doesn't mean a soup of herbicide air in the spring is good for us. So I wish there was more research being done on the potential human health impacts. And then let me just leave you with one more quick video from what they did in Illinois. If it plays.
I look out my top window and I used to see green canopy and luxurious growth and nature. Now I see dead branches.
In general, the trees are getting less healthy every year. We're losing more and more.
It's sad. It's sad to walk through the woods.
It's not just me who's breathing this. It's all the children who come out here to school. It's my own children.
I love vegetables and I love to eat. Yeah, I just wanted to grow my own food.
I still send a complaint every year that, yep, I'm still seeing this issue and I'm still out here.
It makes me feel like I can't live here. I'm the 5th generation here and I love living here, but it makes me feel like I'm negligent parent for exposing my children to the fields around us.
It can't feel good about seeing something that you spent your whole life protect, dying in front of your eyes and not being able to do anything about it.
Makes me feel violated.
It's terrible. I don't want to live like this.
I just don't know what the solution's gonna be. I would hope that somebody will finally say, yeah, if it's chemical damage and we're gonna end it, it's gonna stop.
Okay. That's the little bit I wanted to share with you on just graphically wise, but I want to get out of the way now and let Brad and Bruce and others on this conversation chime in quickly for 5 minutes. What did I miss there, or what would you like to add to it? Let's start with you, Bruce. Are you able to chat?
Yes, I finally got things working.
You've had to deal with it directly in your business in the McCook area, and you've also see it wherever you're out working in landscapes.
Yes, this week I spent a lot of time in my garden, and this week, we haven't been off of 90 degrees for 2 weeks and wind every day. And so, whatever, within a couple of days, my tomatoes, trees as well. I can show you a lot of them, but my garden, they are you can really see it. Real quickly. And it's just yellow on the south side. I don't know what they're doing. I don't remember dicamba necessarily being so bad about that. I don't know if it's another herbicide, but on the wind side, a lot of yellowing, and on the downwind side, it'll be green. But so we're still getting it. People, it is like that one gal said on your video, I feel violated. It's a really disheartening feeling when yeah, almost
Yeah.
as bad as seeing the raccoons have taken your sweet corn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it as bad? Is it bad every year for you? Is it worse some years?
It seems like it's gotten better here, but I've been kind of a pain in the neck to some of my neighbors, and they've gone with alfalfa instead of row crops now. So but it's still, even though that's the case, I still am witnessing damage just this week. It's still happening, and I see it in my trees. But the one thing I was going to say to you to add, that I'm trying to convince people to get a little more proactive on pre-emergent, because you can put pre-emergence down generally without any volatilization. And if your threshold is a little, off the ground a little bit, you can tolerate, I would think a few weeds, but pre-emergence, I think, would help a lot if we'd shift that way.
Yeah, right on. I think Brad, he's been coming up with some ideas like that for us to promote more of, right, Brad?
Well, Justin, yeah, there's opportunities for pre-emergent herbicide in the spring that don't volatilize. And, there's obviously synthetic chemical options, but there's also options like, corn gluten. Pelletized corn gluten is one option that's been tested. It's something that requires, I think, a little bit more investigation and potentially accumulation in your soil over the course of multiple applications. But if people are looking for organic options for pre-emergent weed control, they've talked about pelletized corn gluten being one option. And what better source of pride for Nebraskans than controlling weeds with the corn that we grow?
Yeah.
This is a byproduct of a milling process.
Seems
Additionally,
like
it's about
no-brainer.
10%, it's about 10% nitrogen as well. At any rate, these are things that need to be studied more. And of course, if you're trying to get your lawn to look like a golf course, corn gluten is probably not going to be your solution. But if you're looking for a pre-emergent herbicide to at least address some of the issues that you might be having, this might be consistent with where people are at, for how they view their lawn and the possibilities for at least some kind of control in their lawn. Justin, there's a couple of questions here that I think maybe you could address. So one of them actually has to do with granular herbicide, and there a possibility of it being taken up through the roots? And then the other question was, Nicole was asking about glufosinate. What kind of damage are we seeing with that? And I think we have some information primarily from the Prairie Rivers Network.
Yeah, Nicole, good question. What are you seeing with how the glufosinate works? It's a burn down, right? So it's, I think it'll have similar looking damage to Roundup, and I'm not sure how volatile it is. So this is new to us in terms of trying to track down it feels to me like the glufosinate is not going to be the big harmer that the growth regulator herbicides are, but we have to study it going forward. And then, yes, we have definitely seen granular herbicide damage. Bruce can probably speak to this. He's out and about working with clients that have like keeping their gravel roads clean. That's where I see it, fence lines and gravel road edges, where we're just trying to keep landscapes clean. And those often have things like triclopyr or picloram, which is part of tordon in them. Is that what would you say that's true, Bruce?
Yes. I was going to say the video or the photo you showed of mine, excuse me, earlier there of the spruce trees, that was not granular, but root uptake. Beautiful farm place. They wanted pre-emergent on their rock driveway. The lawn care company used a product that absolutely states do not use near trees. Treated the driveway, rain came, it's got a crown on it, shed, pond, went and ponded down by those spruce trees, and they're all on their way out. So, there again, the people just, it's a small town. They hate to go, they don't want to be a pain in the butt to the applicator, but they've got 25 years in this beautiful place that they built. 30 spruce trees, and to just be taken out like that, it's a bad situation.
Demoralizing.
Yeah.
I see Hal Innevolson has chimed in here with a comment about how he does it in Potter. Potter's a neat place because he's got all these wonderful trees, really unusual out there, but they're all growing in a part of pretty nice lawns too. I mean, Potter is a green and inviting community. And it tells me that we can have nice lawns and good trees if we do it right. So, and that was, Brad, you were getting at that. We're trying to come up with maybe a guide in the coming year about how to get to a better lawn with less inputs or less harm to trees.
That's right. One of the things that I wanted to just mention for the folks who are listening, to Justin's presentation, how is it that we would know that there's herbicide in these leaves? And Justin noted some work that had been done over the last few years from the Nebraska Forest Service, Lori, and the Forest Health Project or program here at the Nebraska Forest Service has taken actual physical samples of these leaves and sent them to analysis labs in South Dakota. And so there's ways in with which their lab can analyze the residue that's inside these leaves. So this is not just a visual assumption that this is herbicide damage, but this is backed up by an actual analysis of the physical leaf itself. And I think the other thing that's worth noting is that we're continuing to do that kind of work this season too. So just as a frame of reference for y'all as to, understand how it is that we know that this is herbicide damage.
Yeah, thanks, Brad, for that. We've taken 15 samples this year and sent them off for analysis. They're not cheap to do, so we can't analyze every tree. Now, it's my understanding if a complaint is filed through the Nebraska Department of Ag, they will take a sample and send it for testing. Okay.
Justin, I not that it's a big point, but I don't, when Craig Romery sat in on our herbicide awareness group the other day, I think they have to kind of select the one. Even they are restricted by budget, and I think those guys in the field only get so many that they can send in. You're only budgeted for so many, so it doesn't automatically mean you can send it yourself. Though it's not cheap. You're looking at about 150, I think, and if you put them on that's if you know what you suspect is in there. If it's a fishing expedition, you're looking at about 750.
Right.
Yeah. Two quick things. Oh, go ahead, Bruce.
No. And to do all that really for no satisfaction in the end, nothing's going to happen.
So as chair of the Community Forestry Council, Bruce has put together a herbicide drift committee. We're working on some ways to spread the word a little bit, at least at the homeowner level. And so if you're interested in getting involved in that, you can certainly reach out to myself and I can get you in touch with those folks if you wanted to get involved in that committee. We did have one other question in the chat that will be a perfect segue into our fruit tree discussion. Roy asked, what's the best way to help fruit trees recover when they've gotten some herbicide drift? And maybe from there we can move into a discussion on fruit trees specifically.
Yeah, I like that. Go ahead and touch on that, Brad. And also, oh, I lost my train of thought. I was going to say maybe finish up as we were talking about the herbicide drift damage. We were seeing that it's both rural, community edge, and in urban interiors. So yeah, go ahead, Brad.
No, that's great, Graham. I appreciate that. Well, the reality, you guys, is just like any other tree, you know, what is the extent of the damage with herbicide onto the tree itself? Is it possible that it can outgrow it? I mean, if you do a little bit of reading, anytime there's herbicide damage, they basically just say make sure the tree gets enough water, right? Is it going to push new leaves? You know, those are that's a good question. I mean, how would you deal with herbicide damage in any other plant besides just trying to water it, right? And I think that's the same thing that we might be experiencing with our fruit trees as well. Bruce, Justin, do you have any other insight on what you might try to do after an incidence of herbicide damage?
I'm gonna let Bruce answer this, and I'd like to know, Bruce, if you found one theory that some of us have is this: when it's a repeat herbicide event year after year, these tree tissues may be carrying forth that herbicide more than 1 year, or expressing it more than 1 year. So that's kind of a double whammy. What's your experience, Bruce?
I think that might be very realistic, possibility. Look at the windbreaks on the north side of row crop fields that have been row crop, continual row crop. Yeah, it's year after year. It takes a toll. I don't know what else to say. One thing I would say about I get the calls from customers that the neighbor sprayed. They called him, and they tell him wash the plant down. Now, if volatilization, if vapor can harm a tree, what the heck does, other than making you feel like you're doing something? I would be curious to know if really what good that does. I don't follow the logic. So anyway.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Bruce. You know, unfortunately, I don't think that there's a great answer. And you know, Phil has noted down here, you know, make sure that your trees stay mulched, make sure that your trees stay watered. You know, it's a challenge that we're all going to be experiencing, dependent upon how, you know, our proximity to both particle drift and volatilization. But I think the reality is that volatilization is happening even in places where you might not have immediately adjacent spraying going on. So it's really a challenge for just about anybody who wants to try and grow grapes or fruits or bur oaks in this part of the country at this point. Graham, before we go on, I wanted to show one thing just as a proof of concept here. Justin and I have been trying to kind of understand volatilization. Volatilization itself is kind of a bit of a strange concept, but just, you know, as opposed to particle drift, that's the actual physical drift of the spray moving off site through wind. But volatilization, as Justin showed in that video, is the chemical leaving the site through kind of an evaporative tendency. And so Justin and I created this thing we called the herbicide volatilization risk calculator. This is a proof of concept, but I want to show it because it starts to help us understand maybe what would be a better or a more appropriate tool for people who are applying these pesticides. And so, for example, let's just use today's weather right now. It's 73 degrees outside, 73 degrees. The high today looks like it's going to get up to 81 degrees. The relative humidity right now, and this is an important factor when we're talking about herbicide drift or herbicide volatilization, because if you have low relative humidity, you have a higher potential for drift to occur. So we have a high relative humidity today. We're going to be outside spraying dicamba. We're going to spray it on leaves versus bare ground. These are also two factors that change, you know, what might happen to that herbicide once it's applied. Somebody noted in there, are we talking about the heat of the day? So late afternoon would be considered possibly the heat of the day. So if it's higher outside. And wind speed is another factor in volatilization. Low wind speeds are actually less advantageous because what happens is if things start to volatilize, they sit and hover around. So if you have a moderate wind speed, it actually moves that chemical out in a little bit more efficient way. I know it's gross to say, but that's the reality. So for example, you could put all of these variables into your volatilization risk calculator. We check the risk, and lo and behold, today is a pretty low risk if we're going to be spraying by dicamba for volatilization. Now let's take that relative humidity down to 15%, and let's take the anticipated high temperature up to 95. And look at that, our moderation, our risk goes up quite a bit. So we're kind of exploring this tool, and Justin and I developed this just primarily as a way to try and understand what volatilization is, because I think we as just citizens, we understand when the crop duster comes over and there's mist coming out of the spray, that is a form of drift. But there's this whole other chemical process called volatilization that requires us to kind of understand various variables. And so Justin and I, we want to mess around with this risk volatilization calculator just as a way for us to better understand it so that we can teach people what's going on when they're spraying in their landscape. So anyhow, Justin, just wanted to introduce that because I think it's a pretty useful tool. It's helped me understand this concept of low relative humidity creates higher opportunities for volatilization. And what I think happened probably this spring is we had some wet days, and then things dried out and it got really hot. There was low relative humidity, high temperatures, and volatilization really occurred with this second burn down when people got in their fields and decided to spray weeds out. Any thoughts on that, Justin, Bruce, or Graham?
Do you have a link to that you can put it in the chat?
No, this is not public. Unfortunately, Graham, this is just purely conceptual. So there's
Okay.
no link to it, but I just wanted to kind of convey to people that we're attempting to understand what this process looks like. Phil, you had a comment?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
I've seen cases where volatilization herbicide did damage, and the concern or the interest is that it doesn't spread like droplets spread. So droplets being pushed with the wind, you see kind of a fan shape. With volatilization, it can actually move over sections that aren't damaged at all and then settle in a given area. I'm not sure what causes the settling. Some of
Sure.
it is it goes over a more sensitive plant, but that's not always the case. So the way volatilization damage occurs isn't like we're used to looking when we see droplets being pushed by the air.
That's correct, Phil. And I think one of the things, this is complex, and I think that's why it's a challenge.
Sure.
But we have something called thermal inversion. And thermal inversion is really one of the reasons why you have drift potentially being pushed toward ground level and moving, or moving up in the air and then descending and kind of getting stuck in some areas. And it might just be affecting vegetation in a localized area as opposed to over a large area. And in my experience, for example, when I walk through my neighborhood, the lower branches on all of the pin oak trees are smoked. They're curled, they're twisted, and they look toasted. And that's where all the herbicide's been staying, right? It's settled in the under part of the canopy. You look on the higher parts of the trees and there's quite a bit less damage. This is a little bit disconcerting because that's where we all live and breathe and walk our dogs too. But at any rate, we're going to just assume that it's not too problematic for our human health. But I think this type of thermal inversion and the ability of this herbicide vapor to remain in an area like that is what we're seeing when we see those incidences.
Sure.
Okay, any other thoughts here?
Brad, I was going to say another source that we might not think of. We didn't have a wet spring here. We didn't have any moisture at all. We had horrible dust storms after guys had planted already. And I would think back to Mark Harrell talking about salt damage on trees along the interstate. And he said they found, it'd be the same principle. They found that there was more damage caused by, it's like a gravel road after the salt dries on the interstate. All the salt is in the air, dusty looking. That was doing more damage than the actual salt spray maybe being sprayed. It's the same thing with pre-emergents were applied. on bare ground, on corn that was planted. And if you didn't have a pivot to incorporate it, a lot of that stuff took the trip, landed on leaves. The first dewy morning you have, then it is activated again. So that's just another source. So if you're thinking, where did this come from? It could have come from 40 miles away, for heaven's sakes.
Good points, Bruce. Yeah, our friends in Illinois have documented that they feel it's getting up in the atmosphere and moving several miles. So that would explain a lot of what we're seeing. We'll let everybody know we've reached about an hour here. Everybody's free to leave. I've put some links in there about, but we're gonna have Brad do fruit trees here in a second. I put links in there about free trees for Nebraska towns through the Trees for Nebraska Towns program. Spread the word. Trees, despite all these problems, are still hugely valuable. We're not losing all of our oak trees. We're just ringing the alarm here. And then come back August 8th, we're going to have a fun webinar. Well, I mentioned earlier with Hal Innevolson is on today, Galen Whitrock and Chrissy Land. They'll talk about their favorite trees for Western Nebraska. Bruce, maybe you could chime in too on that day. Talk about what you can coax out of growing in the McCook area. And that's what we're looking at for next month. But anybody's free to leave now if they want, but we're going to stick around here for a few minutes. We can keep taking questions about anything, but especially wanted to have Brad an opportunity to talk about fruit trees. That's a growing topic of interest in these channels, Brad, and you've had a lot of experience in growing fruit trees. This is the time of year when we're generally spraying and pruning them, right? And
Hey,
doing all
Justin, real
kinds of things.
quick, I did put a link to the CEU and feedback form.
Yes,
Even if
Graham,
you're
right.
not certified as an arborist and you just want to tell us we're doing a horrible job or whatever you want to tell us about the webinars, please click that link, share your thoughts, and if you have CEU information you need to plug into there, we will submit all that to NAA, ISA, SAF. So whatever CEU credits you need, we'll get those submitted on your behalf if you fill out that form.
Do they have to fill out the form before the webinar is over?
No, it'll be up for a while, but like I said
Okay.
earlier, at least click the link so that you have that in your browser ready to fill out. Shortly after the form is
Awesome.
after the webinar is over, and we'll probably take a look at that later this afternoon and finalize it.
Great, Graham. Thank you
makes
for that
sense?
reminder. Yeah, good work, man.
And I hate to pile on the herbicide thing. I feel like this is the herbicide webinar. But we're all familiar with the concept of property rights and the idea that your rights end where mine are infringed on. And I don't think we're applying that to the herbicide topic appropriately. And I don't have any answers, but I think that's a concept we're all aware of in lots of other cases, but we're just not applying it when it comes to herbicide drift. And so I think that's a useful way of thinking about it. If Bruce sprays his crops and it settles on my trees, even if the answer were spraying them off with water, well, you come spray them off. So, it's a complicated thing, but I think that helps bring some light to why it's so frustrating. So with that, Brad, let's get on a more positive topic with fruit trees, I guess.
You got it, Graham. Absolutely. Listen, you guys, I'm going to talk for 10 minutes. Stay on if you want to, but go ahead and exit if you need to as well. We appreciate you being here. Listen, Justin said something to the effect of, isn't summer the time where we're kind of spraying our fruit trees? And if you're talking about pests, primarily insects, well, then you would be spraying in the summer. But if you're talking about foliar diseases really need to be addressed at an earlier point in the season, right? And so this is as trees are prior to bud break, as trees are starting to bud out and leaf out, that's the time in with which you start to address foliar issues on trees, primarily fungal diseases. Now, here's the thing. I am not an expert on the chemical spray programs that come along with fruit trees, but a lot of them are quite robust. And there are things called cover sprays, and a cover spray might occur every 10 days or anytime there's an inch of rain. Okay, so if you've been spraying your trees for pests or for fungus, those are things that you're doing regularly. If you already have fungal infections on your trees, you cannot cure a fungal infection. Okay, fungal infections have to be preventative. So just keep that in mind. If you're seeing something on your leaves and you say, what can I spray on this? If it happens to be fungal in nature, nothing. You can't spray anything on it. You missed your window, because fungal infections, you have to prevent them. You cannot cure them. That all being said, I want to go to this first slide. What do we see here? An abundance of peaches. My orchard in Butler County has no peaches, but here in Lancaster County, bumper crop of peaches. This is problematic though. This is too many peaches on one tree. So what is the work that you're doing in the summer, Justin? Well, you have to thin these peaches. If you don't thin peaches, this is what happens. This is this afternoon in the backyard farmer garden. I went over there to check out what their trees looked like. And sure as heck, they're loaded with peaches. Nobody thinned them, and it broke a branch. It is the most miserable feeling to thin a peach. I can't think of anything I'd rather not do than pull fruit off of my fruit tree. Probably very similar to the herbicide damage that you're seeing in Waverly, Justin. It doesn't feel right. I've worked so hard to get these trees to produce fruit, and I have to pull fruit off of it. Yes, you do. So if you're out in your orchard at any point in the next, week or so, you need to be thinning fruit. And I normally thin like 30 fruit per tree. I'm just picking them off, right? And then the next time I come back, I thin another 30 fruit. 30 sounds like a lot, but really you want to try to make sure that you don't get to a point where you could break branches with the weight of fruit that's on your trees right now. So this is a summer activity for fruit growers: apples, pears, peaches, nectarines. Those are the types of things you need to be thinning if you haven't already done it. These were sent in to us from an individual this week. So what is it that we're seeing right here? Again, not an expert entirely on all the insects that impact peaches, but I suspect this is a peach tree borer. Borer insects we see on pines and other things within our state, but peach tree borer specifically attacks these prunus species, and peaches exude this really gummy and sticky sap as a way to try and force that insect out of the hole that they bored in there. It is too late to try and apply a pesticide to this. You have to apply the pesticide when it is in a smaller stage of development. So you've missed your window of opportunity to treat peach trunk borers. However, if you have a clothes hanger, if you have a little piece of wire, you can stick it in there and you can pierce that caterpillar that is inside that hole. And oftentimes that's enough to kill it. People do this on their squash with squash vine borer, right? You go down there, you see a little sawdust at the base of your squash, and you pierce it, or you pull, or you cut it, and you pull that worm out of there, right? That's the same thing. So if you're seeing this on your peach tree, this is most likely peach. It's a peach borer. There's a couple of different species of them. Again, I don't have all the information, but hopefully this is enough for you to say, okay, I want to take some action, or this is what I'm seeing. The other possibility is that you have a canker disease. Let's hope that's not the case, but in this instance, peach stem borer is probably more realistic. A lot of people will see this on their trees, especially on their fruit trees at this point in the season. Sometimes there's a little bit of sap oozing from them, but most likely, if you have a fruit tree, you've limbed it up over the course of the last few years, and limbing it up can prevent or can encourage frost cracking in the winter time. Frost cracking also will kind of exhibit maybe some oozing sap and other things in the summertime months, but frost cracking is best prevented in your fruit trees by either painting the lower half of the south side of the trunk that gets exposed to all that warm sunlight in the winter months, or putting some kind of white reflective plastic around it in the winter. So again, if you're looking at your trees wondering what's going on, possibly it's frost cracking. This is very symptomatic of late spring, early summer. What's going on your apple tree? This is called fire blight. This is caused by a bacteria. This is extremely destructive for apples in the state of Nebraska and all throughout the Midwest. Fire blight can be mitigated by pruning out what is called a strike. So if you're seeing this characteristic shepherd's crook on your apple trees, you can prune that out by pruning. Clean your pruners and prune, they say 12 to 18 inches back from where the strike has occurred, because that bacteria wants to travel into the tree through the, through the xylem and phloem, right? The tissue of the tree, the bacteria is going to move back towards the trunk, but you can prune that strike out because the bacteria infected it through a blossom sometime this spring. So you can prune out the strikes of your fire blight. Make sure that you disinfect your tools between cuts. That's on an apple tree. This is my pear tree in a part of my orchard in Butler County. So what's going on here? This is not symptomatic of fire blight. I don't think it's herbicide drift. It's not symptomatic of fire blight like you'd see in an apple. But here's the thing, I do think this is fire blight in pear. Now, certain species or varieties, excuse me, of apples and pears have different susceptibility to diseases. Some varieties are not susceptible to fire blight at all. Like, for example, in apples, Liberty has no susceptibility to fire blight. So if you plant a Liberty apple, you don't have to worry about fire blight at all. But if you have a Honeycrisp in your landscape, you certainly have to pay attention for fire blight. This pear right here is a European pear. I suspect that this is fire blight. I'm taking some samples and I'm going to send it to the UNL plant pathology lab. But I've seen this in multiple occasions around other people's property as well. There's also the possibility that this is called blast. It's a fungal blast that could potentially have impacted this tree in kind of a cool, wet night. So trying to figure out what the disease is. But again, if it's a fungal or bacterial disease in nature, it's too late for me to be treating it at this point in the season. Here's what I would recommend if you have this problem. Don't plant European peaches or don't plant European pears unless they're disease resistant. So Moonglow is a great disease resistant European pear to fire blight. But if you want some kind of pear, plant Asian pears. Delicious fruit, completely unblemished, not a single foliar or fruit pathogen that I've encountered in my landscape. So I'm a big fan of Asian pears if your European pears are suffering from fire blight or maybe some other types of foliar or pest diseases. Lastly, it's really hot out there. We're going to have a couple of days of reprieve, but just like Justin, if you're out there working in your orchards, you got to take a break. Every once in a while, take a swig from the Tordon just to make sure that it's actively tasting good enough for the trees to take up. But at any rate, that's all I'm going to talk about. If you have any questions about fruit trees, I'm happy to answer questions. Again, not an expert, although Justin said I have some expertise, but it is an interest of mine. And every year you see something a little bit different in your orchard. This is no different than, for example, you're working your vegetable garden. And if you can learn a little bit every year, eventually this accumulated knowledge will help us try and address some of these issues that we're seeing out there.
That was awesome, Brad. Yeah, well, we can stay on and take any questions for Brad. Thanks for doing that. I have a tree in the Waverly Park that was planted as a spring snow or a snowdrift ornamental crab apple. It's supposed to be fruitless, and now it had some sports come up to the side of it from root suckering, and we're getting some big looking apples coming off of those sports. Do you got any thoughts about what's going on there?
Sure. So Justin, you have a rootstock and then you have a grafted plant material on the top of it, right? So what's happened is your rootstock is suckered, and your rootstock was most likely an edible apple variety. Who knows what it was, you know? Most apple rootstock, if it's a semi-dwarf, you know, they have terms like G7 or M111 or something like that. And they tend to just be yellow apple varieties.
Right.
If it's a standard fruit, if it's a standard rootstock, that tends to impart a lot of vigor to your tree. If it's a crab apple, most crab apples are not pruned on standard or grafted onto standard rootstock. They're most likely a semi-dwarf rootstock. So if you want apples, let it grow. But
Yeah.
if I was a homeowner and I had those coming off the base of my tree, I'd probably cut them out.
Yeah, they might be edible then.
Oh, they're absolutely edible. Not
Okay.
might be. They're definitely edible. Yeah.
Yeah, I never would have guessed that they'd use regular apple rootstock, but I suppose why not?
Sure, because that's the majority of the work has been done to create dwarf, semi-dwarf, or standard rootstocks that have disease resistance, and that also tolerate a certain amount of moisture in the soil or lack of moisture in the soil, right? Those are the things that they're selecting for when they're thinking about breeding rootstocks. So drought or too much water or disease resistance. So of course they put crab apples on the same ones.
They're amazing. The young, vigorous stems already have apples on them. I would have thought it would take several years, but anyhow.
It's pretty mature plant, tissue.
Yeah, right.
Bruce.
I heard a fella say one time that fire blight is easy. It occurs on frost damaged material that was damaged a year ago. Do you think that, I mean, I've only heard one guy say that, I won't say his name, but in Nebraska, he was really adamant about it. Any correlation?
Sure. So if you have frost damage, Bruce, the question that I would ask is, do you have open wounding on your tree? And if you have open wounding on your tree, potentially the bacteria could enter. The bacteria is being spread around. Fire blight is a bacterial ooze that will be exuded from a tree in the springtime. It gets picked up by an insect, and that insect moves it around. So primarily, it moves it between blossoms. So there's 2 periods of infection on a fruit tree. You can have blossom blight, which is that your fire blight has entered through the flower, through the pollination process by an insect moving it around, or an insect could land on one little sticky sugary ooze, and then it can move it over to a damaged part of the tree. So it could be hail damage, or it could be a pruning wound. But I question whether or not late frost on a tree would really transmit fire blight unless there's an open, unless there's an opening for the
Okay.
bacterial to get in the bark.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah,
for that explanation.
unless you had vascular tissue that was damaged and allowed air into the wood, right? So maybe the thought is the frost damage breaks that water column in the vessels of the plant, and then there's air, there's oxygen brought into the wood that allows that fungus to sort of activate. Because I know there are species of decay fungus that are present in the wood of plants, but not activated until there's air through a wound or something like that that's brought in and that's that extra piece of the puzzle that allows it to really proliferate.
Sure. It's just worth noting too, Graham, that fire blight is a bacteria. So
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's okay.
Yeah,
No problem.
yeah.
But I think your point's well taken.
Yeah.
Phil, you had a comment?
Yeah, my experience has been, excuse me, that it's a very short time from the injury, whether it's from wind damage or hail, how long those wounds are susceptible to fungus, bacteria, etc., getting into the wounds and affecting the plant. So it's quite short, like a matter of 2 days.
Yeah.
So
Excellent.
saying you've got a frost and then a month later you've got a problem with it, I don't think that's the case.
I would agree.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm all for looking for a silver lining, and just to back up real quick onto the root stock and the root suckering. In park settings, I see where nobody's trimming those sprouts off the base of the tree. They do take the damage from the mower and keep it off the trunk of the trees. As much as it doesn't look very good to have all those sprouts coming off the rootstock on a crabapple, it is keeping the mower from damaging the trunk of the tree. So, not all bad.
Right on, Graham.
How about one last call for CEUs? Get in the chat, click that link if you have any feedback for us, or you have continuing education units that you need for your certification. But I've got about 9 of those rolling in already. So I think, sorry?
Can I make a comment on the sprouts on crabapple? Can you hear me?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So Mark Harold and I did an experiment a long time ago where we used an air spade to look at the roots of lots of different trees that were planted too deep. Flowering crabapple was one of them. Our experience was that those crabapples that produced a lot of suckers had been planted too deep. So I now believe that at least half of the problems with a lot of suckering on flowering crabs is because they were planted too deep, maybe in the nursery before you even got it, so that they're deep in the container. So even if you plant it right, they were deep earlier, or when you plant it, it's too deep. But I think at least half of the problems with suckering is being planted too deep on crab apples.
Yeah, right on. I concur.
I agree 100% on that.
Yeah.
That the too deep planting, and you can't go by the top of the container or even balled and burlap. You need to get down to the brace, the roots where the plant is starting to spread.
And so many people see the flare of the graft and think that's the trunk flare.
Oh, yeah.
That's partly because it's been stopped in there by the nursery, but They see that when you talk about a flare, they see the flare from the graft, and so you could be a foot too deep at that point.
That's a really good point. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. You got comments, Brad, on recognizing the graft union or?
Well, I mean, it's pretty evident and you should just pay attention to it. Like you said, anytime you're planting a new tree, whether it's a containerized or a bare root tree, if you suspect it to be grafted, try to identify where that graft is at and then dig down till you see your first root. And then you're at least at the root flare, Justin. But the majority of trees that you're finding in a nursery, fruit trees, they're all grafted, you guys. They're all coming in, they're all grafted. It's almost impossible to find something that had been grown by seed. I don't even know who would be doing that.
Right.
You mentioned something there that isn't mentioned enough, Brad, and that's planting of bare root trees. Other than the fact that it really is a short season, a small window, it is. I think we should go back to more bare root trees like our grandpas did, and have trees planted properly. It's easier, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I agree, Bruce.
Yeah,
And honestly, as a fruit grower, the majority of what I'm getting are bare root trees because there's an economy to a bare root tree, whereas you're going to start paying a lot more for a potted tree. Now, you go to the nursery, you go to Home Depot, you go to Baumgart's, you're going to see them potted up there. But I don't know how long they've been in those pots, you guys. They could have just been in those pots a few months. So they're getting them from a bare root supplier. They're putting them in a container. Maybe they're growing them for a season. That would be ideal. But if they're not, most of your fruit trees,
Yeah.
think about trying to find them from a bare root supplier. And there's quite a few of them out there.
Yeah, I noticed, Brad, when they come into our Tractor Supply in Waverly, it's not even past the point of frost yet, usually in mid to late March.
Oh yeah, absolutely, Justin. Yeah, I mean, that would be great. They potentially were potted up last fall and they've been in that container, at least for some fall growth. But I don't necessarily think it's worth $25 more.
Right.
So let me be clear, Brad, are you saying if it's stuck in a pot in March, February, or probably not January, but February, would you steer clear of that season in May?
No, Bruce. I mean, I'm going to plant a tree when I want to plant it. So, if I happen to go to Tractor Supply or if I go to Menards or Home Depot and I see the contender peach that I've been wanting for the last few years, I'm going to buy it and put it in the ground. I wouldn't steer clear of it. But I'm just saying, if you guys plan on putting, 15 apple trees or 15 peaches out into your landscape, really think about trying to find a bare root supplier.
I've had experience calls on the so-called parking lot trees that it's been frosted the roots has been the
Right.
problem because they aren't mulched in like a nursery would do. And it's been damaged in the winter. They say, well, I watered it 3 times a day. I just don't know why they're turning brown. Well, the roots were frozen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes if people already have these, the fruit trees, and they're having the fire blight, you got to deal with that. But a lot of times, if they want to get into that, look for resistant varieties.
Thank you. Yeah, I can't emphasize enough. For people who are interested in growing fruit trees, try to just select disease-resistant varieties. And if you have any questions about that, I'd be more than happy to talk with you at another time.
Brad, did you address, I didn't catch it, did you address thinning of fruits?
Yeah, we talked about that. You got to
Okay.
thin your fruit. So, it's preferable to do it early in the year, but if they're starting to get too big right now, you got to be out there thinning them as well. And you're going to have more high quality fruit if you thin.
Good.
I've been I guess, an advocate or evangelist for the bur oak for a long, long time. Is there something going on besides the drift with bur oak? Because we've recommended those out central Nebraska forever because of our pH pressure and open winters and all this kind of stuff. Bur oak has done well, but is that a recommendation that should not be made anymore?
No, Dave, I think that's a great question. We don't want to allude to the idea that we're losing all our bur oaks. We are not. They do show herbicide damage, kind of like a canary in the coal mine. Thankfully, even in Waverly, where I live, most of our bur oaks are kind of keep trucking along. We are very much concerned about big old native bur oaks that are declining in our woodlands, like at Mahoney State Park, Ponca State Park. And they're figuring out that it's probably death by 1,000 cuts, including quite a bit of drought stress these last few years, stressing trees by change of just site use with more people around them, cars and all that going on. We mentioned herbicide drift. And then there's you just a myriad other things, death by 1,000 cuts that come to these native trees. One idea now is that these native woodlands have changed their own plant composition, so these trees are competing against forest understory plants like gray dogwood that never used to be there in those numbers. So they're still speculating, Dave, but in my opinion, when I travel around out your way in western Nebraska, the bur oaks always shine, even in our communities. So I think they're still a great tree to hang our hat on.
Yeah, I would
Okay.
agree. I think that, well, I know that what we're doing now is talking about an oak decline complex, right? In other words, there's multiple factors going into this, Dave, sometimes. And
Uh-huh.
along the Missouri River corridor, it gets more complicated than it does in our communities. Um, but in the case of Ponca State Park, they had a named tree that was very old, and I think it was a mistake to even make that known to the public. Um, Trees can be loved to death sometimes. Oaks are sensitive to compaction, even foot traffic, in a chronic way where you have hundreds or thousands of people over the course of a year walking around the tree, admiring it. It's great to give people access to trees that they love and admire, but it doesn't do the tree any favors. So, um, the death by 1,000 cuts, I think, is so relevant with oaks because they have these sensitivities that kick off a decline spiral along with a drought cycle, along with pathogens, along with mechanical injury, herbicide drift.
Yeah.
So it's hard to pin any one thing on what we're seeing in
Yeah.
oaks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're right on, Graham. And what
Probably have to
it looks
blame, we
like to
probably have to
me, like,
blame Justin for that because he wrote this fabulous story years ago about the oak tree experiencing Lewis and
yeah,
Clark coming through the area.
right.
That was one of the best articles that you've written, and you've done a lot of good ones.
Oh, you're too
It's
kind,
all
Dave.
your fault, Justin.
I do, it's interesting though, it feels to me like it's worse on our native trees. So it feels like if a bur oak grows up with all the stress of the community, it's okay. But when the stress of human activity comes to it, that's another animal. So
I guess one thing I've observed, and I don't know if it's real or not, is we've had the bullet galls on our bur oak lately, and it seems like the ones that have the most of them on had their source in, I don't know, we want to call Bruce's Canyon, Burro Canyon, and I just wonder if they've been so protected or isolated that when they get exposed, then crossed and exposed to the so-called real world instead of that phenomenal location in Burro Canyon, if they tend to be more susceptible, uh, yeah,
yeah, go
maybe
ahead,
like the
Bruce.
emerald ash coming in from Asia, that the
Right.
pests, the predators and all grew up with it, so they don't have the problem. Then they put that wood in our part of the world, and boom, we have
There's
problems.
there's clearly a genetic factor on bullet gall. So what do you think, Bruce?
I don't know. But I've had plenty of, won't say the name, nursery trees that we used to deal with out of Minnesota. Uh, Bullet gall on them long before I was interested in Burro Canyon oaks.
Right.
Yeah, I've seen oak trees loaded with bullet gall from various seed sources.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
uh, we definitely don't have our thumb on the exactly what's going on there to make a difference. Systemic insecticides don't seem to be effective. I don't think that egg that's developing inside the bullet gall is actually feeding on the phloem of the tree at all. So um, we're not exactly sure how we might even want to uh, discourage or inhibit the growth of those galls if we had a way to do it.
Yeah.
Conundrum.
Yeah. But I
That
have
was
seen
just
them
an
girdle
observation.
branches.
Yeah.
Uh, if anyone's interested in bullet gall, I don't know if I could get to the site right now, but Iowa State, it's been a number of years ago, that had a pretty good article on it, or piece. And they even talk about which ones to remove. You don't remove them all because the predators overwinter in some of the little shell thing.
Oh, that's good to know, Bruce.
But they even talked about the stickiness of like honeydew, and I can't remember, but it was, this is how you determined which ones to remove.
Okay.
So if you get to Iowa State and bullet gall, that was pretty informative. It's been so many years ago, I don't remember what the exact formula was though.
Doing a little looking here, Bruce, and if I find something, I'll share it with
Okay.
everybody afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome, Bruce. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that either. That predator is still in there. Yep.
Yeah, Roy's
And,
asking about oak wilt, if it's a problem with our oak trees, and if so, how to minimize it. Oak wilt is most virulent in our red type oaks. So red oak, black oak, pin oak, any of those oaks that have the bristled lobes on the end instead of the rounded lobes, which would be your white types. They can affect both types of oak though. I did a backyard farmer piece on this a few months back, but it is complicated. It is, of course, encouraged by other stress factors. Um, there are some treatments, but generally you have an insect vector for oak wilt, and you also have a below ground vector from tree to tree through root grafts. So in some cases in Texas where oak wilt is really prevalent, they're actually taking a subsoiler and breaking the below ground connections between trees in oak forest stands in order to slow down the spread of oak wilt. But it is complicated. We probably don't have time to go over all of it today, but I think Backyard Farmer saves those videos from past episodes you could look at. But Texas A&M is a great source of information on oak wilt.
yeah, and I personally just don't see much oak wilt in Nebraska, but I know you have, Phil Pierce, and in the native woods, I've seen it in two pockets of red oak. One was in south of Nebraska City. I remember being showed that. So I can't comment on how prevalent it is, but it's not the biggest impact on our oaks, is what I would say.
Right, I agree.
And
Well, that was a good talk, guys. We went a little long, but it was all great information. Everybody's sticking around to hear it, so that's a good sign. We're not just up here flapping our gums.
Oh yeah, we could do a deep dive on bur oak, just all the fun, good, bad, and indifferent. Maybe we'll make that a future topic. If anybody has topic ideas, please send me a personal note. We'll try to keep this going for a couple of years. Be sure to come back next month. We're going to talk about some of the cool trees in western Nebraska. Hal Enevolson was on today, and he's going to share some. If you ever get a chance to go to Potter to see what he can grow there, that's pretty cool. And then Galen Whitrock and Chrissy Land will also be on that panel.
Could Graham, oh, look at all those hearts on Graham there. Wow.
Yeah.
Floating up. I don't know if you saw that. Graham you still look a little funny without the facial hair. Anyway, I mean, it's hard, it looks odd.
I might have to go back to it at some point.
Yes. Anyway, paint on, people talk about pruning paint. So oak wilt, I don't have a lot of oaks, and I don't have oak wilt here. Isn't that with elm and oak? Isn't that the one that you should use a latex or can during the summer? Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Yep. If you absolutely have to prune oaks or elms in the warm months, any kind of latex paint it is believed to be beneficial in preventing that spread of oak wilt or Dutch elm disease. You're right there.
You disagree, Phil? I saw you shaking your head.
I've just tried a lot of pruning to prune out Dutch elm disease back during the Dutch elm disease epidemic in Omaha, and the transmission went from pruning wounds for the disease I've seen is very, very minimal. I get worried about starting to say, let's start painting because there's so many detrimental problems with painting wounds. Largely, it's the whatever you're using may be toxic to the live tissue around the edge of the wound and actually enlarge the wound. I think it's a push as to whether it's beneficial or not. So why take the extra effort and cost? That's just my opinion on it.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm definitely not talking about preventing the spread of oak wilt in a tree, but preventing it from being in the tree in the first place.
Yeah. This is a
But
great
you're right.
program.
I don't think that there's any definite answers there. Just some concepts that seem like they might be beneficial, but
Yeah,
yeah,
I've seen it promoted like on Wisconsin DNR. They talk about like if you have red oak storm damage and you have oak wilt nearby, clean up those storm wounds and then paint those wounds. And I found that kind of off-putting too, Phil, but they swear by it in Wisconsin, so I'm not sure what to say.
yeah. If I was only reading about it on some tree services website, it'd be one thing, but when I see academic sources about it, then I'm a little more inclined to think that there might be something there, but hard to say.
Yeah. This is a great program. Thank you guys for putting it together for us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Bruce. Thanks everybody else.
Yeah, thanks,
In the
guys.
gallery
guys.
there.
Good
Yeah.
work. We're gonna tune out of here. We'll be back
Okay.
next month.
Yep.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Last call for CEUs. We'll leave everything open for a few minutes if anybody else, but I think those 9 responses I've got has stayed pretty static. So I think all you guys that needed to do that have done so already. So thanks for all the great questions and the discussion.
Yeah, Graham, good job. Good work, everybody. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Bruce.
Adios.